The whispering pines and the woman who watched in a small Appalachian town nestled between green-breasted hills and whispering pine trees lived a woman named Clara Mayfield. She was what folks like to call a simple woman, but don't let Name led. The phrase "fool you simplicity" is often the disguise worn by quiet strength. Clara ran the local general store, where she sold everything from honey jars to hunting boots. Her life was one of quiet rhythms. Sunrise coffee on the porch. Evenings feeding the chickens, Sundays at church, and every Wednesday volunteering at the town's food pantry. She wasn't flashy. She didn't have social media. Heck, she still used a flip phone with T9 texting. It's commitment to minimalism right there. But inside her, something had been brewing. The call of the Bullseyes started the day her father passed. Clara inherited a single keepsake, an old Winchester, Model 70 bolt-action rifle. Her father had been a sharpshooter in the military, but more than that, he'd taught Clara to shoot tin cans off fence posts when she was just 10. After his funeral, the rifle sat in the back of her closet for 3 years, till one morning. As fog drifted like ghost stories through the trees, Clara dusted off the gun case, clicked it open, and said out loud to nobody in particular, "Let's see if the old girl still sings." She drove up to Cedar Hollow shooting range, a place where the regulars all knew each other, their favorite stalls, and whose aim was as sharp as their opinions. It was like Cheers, but with ear protection and gunpowder. Clara walked in, wearing a faded flannel, jeans with one knee patched, and muddy boots. She carried the rifle in a canvas sack that looked more appropriate for a loaf of sourdough than a firearm. The moment she unwrapped it, silence fell. Not because of the rifle. It was vintage, but respectable, but because of her. A woman, alone. At a range mostly frequented by burly men with egos locked and loaded. "You're holding it wrong, ma'am," said a man whose beard looked like it had a part-time job as a lumberjack. "You're holding it wrong." Clara turned, raised an eyebrow. "Am I now?" "Yep, you're not tucked in right. You'll bruise your shoulder. You need your stance more aggressive." She gave him a patient smile. "Aggressive doesn't suit me. I like firm and focused." There were chuckles from the back. One man nudged another and whispered something about Pinterest princesses with rifles. Another said she's going to drop it after the recoil. Clara didn't argue. She adjusted her earmuffs, stepped into the booth, and exhaled like she was about to iron a shirt. Calm, steady. She loaded a single round, took aim. Bang. The bullet sang through the air like it had an appointment with destiny and hit dead center. On the bullseye. The room went still. Then she fired again. And again. 10 shots. 10 bullseyes. The last shot was so perfect. It split the edge of the ninth. She lowered the rifle and looked over her shoulder. "Well, would you look at that?" She said dryly, "I guess it wasn't too wrong." From skepticism to applause, the man with the lumberjack beard looked like someone had told him. Santa Claus was a hologram. Someone in the back clapped, then another, till the whole line of shooters broke into applause. Not because she was flashy, not because she was cocky, but because she had that rare, unshakable, quiet confidence that didn't need to shout to be heard. Clara tipped her head modestly, packed up her things, and walked out like the ending scene of a cowboy movie. All that was missing was a tumbleweed and a harmonica solo. But that moment, it wasn't just about a perfect shot. It was the beginning of something. Something far bigger than Clara imagined. Because by the time she returned to the range the next week, someone had snapped a photo of her target sheet, posted it to the local community page. Caption read, "A simple woman came to the range and shut every mouth with 10 shots. Grace under pressure. Respect." It went viral, at least by small-town standards. But more than likes and comments, it inspired. Young girls started showing up at the range with their moms. Women who'd always felt intimidated by shooting sports emailed the range manager asking for classes, and Clara just kept showing up, firing her 10 rounds, sipping her thermos of cinnamon tea, and leaving like it was just another Wednesday. But one day, everything changed. Because someone from a national amateur sharpshooting competition saw the video and reached out with a question that would flip Clara's world upside down. How would you feel about competing at the regional championships? The invitation, the mirror, and the storm the letter came on a Thursday. It was a simple manila envelope with no return address. The kind that usually brought nothing but bills or bureaucratic boredom. Clara found it nestled between a gardening catalog and an overdue notice from the local library. She opened it without fanfare, expecting maybe a flyer for a farm auction or another reminder that her driver's license was up for renewal. But as her eyes moved across the page, they narrowed. Slightly. The air around her seemed to pause. The words were formal, sharp-edged, and heavy with something she hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. Dear Miss Mayfield, we recently came across a video showcasing your exceptional marksmanship at Cedar Hollow shooting range. Your skill, precision, and poise under pressure are remarkable. It is with great pleasure that we invite you to participate in the upcoming Regional Sharpshooting Invitational to be held in Montgomery County this September. This is an open-class event welcoming both amateurs and rising professionals, and your presence would honor the spirit of competition. Travel expenses and accommodations will be covered should you accept. We look forward to your response. Sincerely, Elijah Kemp, Coordinator. Appalachian Regional Shooting League. Clara sat in her kitchen, the letter flat on the oak table, her mug of lukewarm tea forgotten beside it. Outside, the hens clucked aimlessly in their coop, and the wind rustled through the pine trees like whispers of the past. She folded the letter again, not roughly, not carelessly, but with a kind of reverence, and then she just sat there to the outside world. Clara Mayfield might have seemed like someone who lived gently, without hunger for praise or recognition, but internally, the gears were always turning. She'd grown up with an alcoholic mother who slammed doors harder than she ever hugged. Her father, the rifleman, and her one anchor in a choppy sea, had taught her to aim with calm hands, even when the world around her felt like it was coming apart at the seams. The marksmanship, that was the easy part. Living through the grief, the loneliness, the invisible bruises, that was where Clara had really learned how to steady herself. So when the invitation arrived, it wasn't just a ticket to a tournament, it was a mirror held up to her life. Asking a question she wasn't sure she'd ever truly answered. Was she ready to be more than just capable? Could she dare to be excellent? She didn't decide that day. Clara wasn't impulsive, not even with a cup of coffee. But that night, she sat on her porch under a tapestry of stars, rifled across her lap, and thought about her father, about his words, often said in a half-laugh, half-truth kind of way. A good shot doesn't pull the trigger to prove something. She pulls it when the moment's ready, and not a blink before. The moment, it seemed, had finally come. By Monday, she mailed back her response. Yes, I'll be there. The training begins. Clara didn't hire a coach. She didn't buy fancy gear or try to reinvent herself. She trained the way she lived, steadily, quietly, and with full-hearted intent. Every morning before the store opened, she drove up to a clearing beyond the ridge, where the fog moved like ghost stories and the deer scattered at the sound of her tires. She set up makeshift targets using old license plates and soda cans, practicing not only her aim, but her breath control, her trigger timing, and her posture. She read old sniper manuals, borrowed from a retired Marine who lived in a trailer park down the road, and insisted on calling her Miss Sharpshot. And every time she hit dead center, she didn't cheer. She just nodded once, as if acknowledging. A promise kept. But training, Clara realized quickly, wasn't the hard part. No. The hard part was confronting the voice that started whispering inside her, the one that asked, "Who do you think you are?" The voice that dredged up every moment she'd been overlooked, every time someone had treated her like she was background noise. That voice brought memories she didn't ask for, her mother's dismissive sneer, the men at the range, the teachers who said she had no ambition, and the ex who once told her, "You're not the kind of woman who makes history. You're the kind who bakes cookies for someone who does." Oh, how wrong he'd been. She'd never baked him a single cookie, for one, and for another. Clara Mayfield had never been a supporting character. She'd just been waiting for the right scene to enter. Still, the nerves came, and with them, the unexpected pressure of being noticed, Suddenly people were rooting for her. The local newspaper ran a piece titled "Bullseye in Boots, Our Town's Unexpected Hero." Kids at the store brought her paper targets with crayon bullseyes and "Go Clara" scrawled in jagged handwriting. She was no longer invisible, no longer just the woman who stalked the feed and remembered your dog's name. And that visibility, that expectation, it scared her more than the competition ever could. The storm breaks 1 week before the tournament. Clara hit a wall. Not literally, though. She did back into her porch railing while loading her gear. And the railing lost the fight, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, she missed a target, then another, then 5. Her hands usually as steady as mountain. Rock began to tremble. She wasn't sleeping. Her aim was faltering. The whisper in her mind was no longer a whisper. It was a growl, so she did what she always did when the world got too loud. She drove to the lake. It was a hidden pocket of water where the trout danced just beneath the surface, and the trees curved around like protectors. She hadn't been there in 2 years, not since her father died. But that day, she stood at the shore, stared out at the water, and said aloud, "I'm scared, Dad." The wind rustled. A bird cried out across the lake, "I know I can shoot, but I don't know if I can stand in front of them all and be seen. What if I fail? What if I fall apart in front of everyone who believes in me?" The reply, of course, didn't come in words. But something shifted. Breeze came up, gentle and sure, lifting the brim of her hat just enough for her to feel it, like a hand on her shoulder, weightless and warm. And then she heard her father's voice. Not really, but clear as a bell in her memory. "The shot doesn't make you brave, Clara. Showing up does." She didn't cry. She wasn't that kind of woman. But when she walked back to her truck, there was something different in her stride. A slow-burning resolve. A quiet fire. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be present. The next day, she hit 20 bullseyes in a row. The tournament, the glare, and the grace under fire the morning of the competition arrived like a slow-rolling thunderstorm, heavy, hushed, and thick with anticipation. Clara stood outside the Montgomery County Event Pavilion, dressed in her usual flannel shirt and worn jeans, a stark contrast to the polished athletes bustling around her. Some competitors wore custom-tailored shooting jackets, boots that gleamed like they'd never touched dirt, and sponsor logos stitched with precision. Clara, meanwhile, carried her father's rifle in the same canvas sack she'd brought too. Cedar Hollow months earlier. If there was a prize for humility, she would have taken gold before the first round fired. The air outside the arena carried scent of cut grass and metal, the earthy weight of the field mixing with the oil cleaned, scent of weapons freshly prepped. Clara inhaled deeply, not out of nerves, but out of ritual. This was sacred ground in its own odd way, as she walked into it not like a competitor chasing glory, but like a pilgrim returning to an old prayer. The competition wasn't just a small, regional shootout. This was the stepping stone to national. Amateur rankings. 32 competitors, all with reputations that spanned clubs and forums, gathered on that range. They were men and women from across the Appalachian Belt, some military-trained, others self-taught, but all hungry to prove their skill. Clara, as expected, was the only entrant without a digital profile. No Instagram reels of flawless shooting, no YouTube tutorials, just a name scribbled in pen on the sign-in sheet. As she entered the check-in area, a younger woman with a clipboard and headset greeted her. "Name, please, Clara Mayfield." The woman's eyes lit up. "Oh, you're that Clara. The one from the viral range video. We weren't sure you'd come." Clara offered a polite nod. Had to see if the stories were true. Few other shooters turned at the mention of her name, so glanced her way with curiosity, others with barely hidden skepticism. One man, stocky and sharp-featured, muttered just loud enough to be heard, "That the lady with the antique rifle and the YouTube fame? Cute." Clara smiled the way a mountain smiles at a storm, slow, solid, and unmoved. "Cute," she repeated softly, "has a steady hand." Entering the arena, the first round was a qualifier. Each shooter would fire 10 rounds from a prone position at a distance of 100 yards. The targets were standard, concentric rings, with each inner circle worth progressively more. A perfect center, the elusive X-ring, earned not just points, but respect. The kind of shot that made other shooters stop mid-breath and squint to see if what they'd just witnessed was real. Clara took her place on the far end of the firing line. She laid out her mat, checked her scope, and unwrapped her rifle as if she were unveiling a family heirloom, which, in truth, she was. Beside her, two competitors fussed with digital wind meters and custom bipods. One had a rifle that probably cost more than Clara's entire store inventory, but she didn't glance left or right. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon. Her mind was already counting the rhythm of her breath. In, hold, exhale, trigger. When the signal was given, the air burst with firecrackers of gunshots, a rolling drumline of ambition. Clara fired her first round cleanly. No overcorrection, no twitch. Just the pure, practiced motion of a woman who knew her bones better than her reflection. After her final round, she didn't wait for applause. She stood, packed her things, and walked off the line as calmly as she'd entered. The target runners returned with sheets clipped to boards, and someone let out a low whistle. 10 shots. All inside the X-ring, the range officer announced. Miss Mayfield, you're currently leading. A murmur spread through the crowd like ripples on a still pond. Some stared, others applauded politely. A few looked visibly annoyed, but the scoreboard didn't lie. Clara Mayfield, the simple woman in a flannel shirt, had just outscored former military marksmen, state champions, and people with scopes that could see Mars. The storm behind, the curtain butt behind the scoreboard. Something else was stirring, in a tucked-away corner of the arena. Elijah Kemp, the event coordinator who had sent the invitation, watched Clara with the careful gaze of a chess master. He wasn't just impressed, he was fascinated, not by her aim, though that was formidable, but by her poise. She didn't grandstand. She didn't seek affirmation. She simply showed up and executed with the grace of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone but herself. Elijah, said a tall woman beside him, dressed in a sharply pressed blazer. She's not sponsored, no club affiliation, no press coverage. But she's drawing attention, a lot of it. I know, he replied, his eyes never leaving Clara, and it's about time the world saw what quiet strength looks like. Not. Everyone shared that sentiment. As Clara waited for her second-round placement, she was approached by a man named Brett Harlow, a national contender with a reputation for arrogance disguised as charm. He wore mirrored sunglasses and an artificial smile. You shoot good for someone who looks like she should be canning peaches, he said, offering his hand. Just don't let the pressure get to you. These next rounds aren't exactly backyard stuff. Clara took his hand, shook it once, and replied in a voice as smooth as river stone. Funny you look like someone who's never met a woman that didn't want his advice. His smile froze. She moved past him without a backward glance. Round 2. Standing shot at 200 yards, the second round was where competitors were often separated from the merely talented. Shooting from a standing position with no support required a balance of core strength, focus, and muscle memory. It was less forgiving. Every twitch, every breath could cost a point. The wind had picked up slightly, teasing at the flags posted along the range. Clara adjusted her footing, angled slightly into the breeze, and let her body become part of the landscape. She was, in that moment, not just a shooter, she was a still point in a turning world. She fired her first shot, then another, and another. Every round hit within the 10-dash ring by the end of the round. She was still leading. Beyond the Bullseyes, as the sun dipped lower and the final rounds approached, Clara felt the pressure clawing at her ribs. Not because she doubted her aim, but because the stakes had changed. What began as a quiet act of self-validation had now become something public, something communal. People were watching, hoping, rooting. In the audience, she saw a little girl in a camo jacket, holding a homemade sign that read, "If Clara can, I can too." Clara's throat tightened. It wasn't about trophies anymore. It was about representation. It was about every woman who'd been laughed at, every quiet person told to be louder to be seen.
Alice.
Every soul who'd ever dared to show up with nothing but their skill and integrity and still been questioned. She wasn't just aiming at targets now. She was aiming at old narratives. Every bullseye cracked the shell of a stereotype just a little more. The final shot, the shadowed room, the truth they couldn't ignore. The final round began not with a bang, but with a hush. The kind of loaded silence that settles over a crowd when history is about to be written. By now, Clara Mayfield wasn't just another name on a list. She was the name, the one echoing through the vendor tents, whispered under the bleachers, repeated in the comment sections of hastily uploaded social media clips. In 3 rounds, she had done what no one expected. No flashy gear, no high-tech gadgets, no sponsorships or televised backstory, just a woman with a 40-year-old rifle and a focus that could slice through the noise like a knife through. Orchard-ripe peaches word had spread like wildfire. And by the time the final stage was announced, the spectator section had tripled in size. Reporters, vloggers, and even 2 local news vans had taken up camp near the sidelines. Some were there for the underdog story. Some were waiting for her to falter. Because for every person who loves to watch someone rise, there's another who watches only to see them fall. Clara, however, walked into the arena like she'd walked into her general store every morning for the past 15 years, not with a swagger, not with nerves, but with a simple, practiced grace that said, I belong here, whether you clap or not. The final event was the most difficult. A rapid-fire mixed-distance challenge with moving targets. Competitors had to identify 5 randomized targets each at different ranges. Some shifting left to right across mechanical rails and fire 10 rounds in under 45 seconds. It was a test not only of precision, but of judgment, timing, and adaptability. There were shooters here who had trained months, even years, for this type of setup. Clara had only herself, her discipline, and the thousands of quiet mornings spent sighting fence posts through mountain mist. As the range officer explained the rules, Clara stood still, her rifle slung casually at her side, her eyes scanning the flags for wind direction, her breath steady and even. Ash! She didn't look nervous, but deep inside, under the flannel and the practiced expression, a storm of emotion was gathering. It wasn't fear, not really. It was something subtler, heavier. It was the burden of mattering. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. And that visibility came with weight. She could hear the crowd shifting, murmuring, rustling programs, and adjusting their camera phones. Just behind her, someone said, "This is where she cracks. Nobody flukes it this far." Clara exhaled slowly, through her nose. It's like letting air out of an overinflated tire. She stepped into position. The countdown, the buzzer sounded, and time opened like a floodgate. Clara raised her rifle, locked onto her first target, a steel plate swaying at 150 yards, and squeezed. Ping, a hit. She didn't wait for applause. The next target popped at 220 yards, moving laterally, slow but erratic. She led her shot. With practiced instinct, fired. Ping. Another hit. She didn't think. She reacted. Like a musician playing by ear, her fingers danced across the bolt, reloaded, fired again and again. 10 shots, 42 seconds, 10 hits, no misses, and then the silence again. For a moment, there was nothing. No clapping. No gasping. Just the echo of the final shot ringing out against the trees and the distant hills, like a church bell, marking the end of something sacred. Then thunder. The crowd erupted. Cheers, whistles, applause that sounded almost disbelieving. Clara didn't bow, didn't wave. She simply lowered her rifle, gave a quiet nod toward the range officer, and stepped back from the line. But even before the scoreboard updated, something shifted in the air. Not everyone was clapping. The challenge within 15 minutes of the final round ending. Clara was pulled aside by event staff and escorted into a small office behind the range station. The room was dim, windowless, with old hunting trophies lining the walls and a single ceiling fan clicking overhead like a metronome stuck out of time. Sitting at the desk was a man with silver hair, a suit too clean for the occasion, and the unmistakable expression of someone who didn't like his routines interrupted. He introduced himself as Greg Dunmore, lead official for the Appalachian Shooting League's integrity panel. "Miss Mayfield," he said, steepling his fingers, "we have received a formal challenge regarding your final round performance. Clara blinked once. A challenge? Yes. Several competitors have raised concerns about the consistency of your results. They've requested a review for possible equipment, tampering, or unauthorized assistance. Clara didn't speak immediately. She didn't roll her eyes or protest. She simply tilted her head slightly, as though trying to understand how a perfect shot had become a suspicious one. "Are you accusing me of cheating, Mr. Dunmore?" she asked, not with indignation, but with the level tone of a woman who'd been falsely judged before and survived it. Dunmore raised a hand as if to halt her thoughts midstream. "No accusation, merely a review. Standard procedure when someone performs significantly above expectations." That word, significantly. As if her ability had been an error, a deviation from the norm. They inspected her rifle. They reviewed the footage. They even brought in an independent technician to evaluate the optics. Hours passed in a haze of bureaucratic delay while outside, the rest of the competitors celebrated, posed for pictures, and shared war stories over barbecue sandwiches and lukewarm soda. But Clara didn't complain. She sat in that room, calm as a pond at dusk, sipping lukewarm coffee and watching the clock when the review was completed. The technician, a woman named Rita, with sharp eyes and no patience for politics, handed over her report. "Clean, no modifications. Scopes standard. Trigger's been replaced, but it's within legal range. Everything checks out." Dunmore didn't look pleased, but he nodded. "We'll proceed with the awards," he said. Clara stood, picked up her rifle, and before leaving added, "Next time, maybe ask why someone like me could be that good, not if I should be." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. She had already won the only argument that mattered, the ceremony that evening. The sun lowered itself behind the pines, and the awards were announced on a makeshift stage. Clara stood off to the side, not dressed in anything fancier than a clean denim jacket and boots she'd polished with a dishcloth. When her name was called, the applause returned louder, fuller, no longer tinged with uncertainty. She didn't make a speech, didn't cry, didn't wave the trophy overhead. She just stepped to the mic and said, "I was told once that showing up is braver than hitting the mark. I believe that now more than ever." Then she walked down the steps, past the men who had doubted her, and headed straight for the little girl with the homemade sign, who had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder. Clara knelt beside her, signed the back of the poster, and whispered, "You show up, sweetheart, no matter who says you can't." And with that, Clara Mayfield disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a score sheet they'd talk about for years and a legacy that went far beyond the bullseye. The spotlight, the silence, and the woman who stayed grounded. Success, as Clara Mayfield soon learned, doesn't always arrive like a sunrise, soft and golden and welcome. Sometimes it roars in like a freight train. Iron wheels screaming on tracks you didn't lay, carrying passengers you never invited. In the weeks following her victory at the Montgomery County Invitational, Clara's quiet world became anything but. What began with a polite round of applause and a plastic trophy turned into newspaper articles, radio call-ins, podcast interview requests, and, eventually, a full-page feature in Southern Marksman Monthly under the headline, "The Simple Woman Who Outsmarted the Elite." That title alone rankled her. She hadn't outsmarted anyone. She had outpracticed them, outfocused them, and outlasted the noise they carried like medals on their sleeves. But nuance rarely survived the printing press. The general store, once a haven of quiet transactions and neighborly greetings, now buzzed with visitors from out of town, fans, reporters, curious, looky-loose, hoping to catch a glimpse of the sharpshooter in flannel. Some tried to take selfies with her while she stocked the shelf with canned peaches. Others wanted her to autograph paper targets they brought in from the range. One woman, with a wide grin and glitter eyeshadow, even asked if Clara would be interested in launching her own line of hunting apparel. "Clara wear," she said. "Rugged meets real." Clara politely declined, and handed her a coupon for 10% off poultry feed instead. But the attention didn't stop at novelty soon. She was invited to competitions in other states. Organizations wanted to feature her as the face of women in shooting sports. A documentary team emailed asking for access to her personal journey from obscurity to accuracy. She received letters, handwritten, heartfelt ones from women in small towns who'd felt invisible their whole lives, and now, because of Clara, felt permission to be seen. High school girls from Montana to Mississippi wrote about how they had picked up a rifle for the first time because their fathers had shown them her video and said, "Look, this is what calm looks like." Clara read every letter, she answered. Most of them, even if only with a single line, but every envelope she opened left something behind, a tiny, intangible weight added to her shoulders. She had never asked to be a symbol. She wasn't looking to be a movement or a figurehead or anyone's guiding light. She just wanted to be good at something her father had taught her. She wanted to aim true, not start a wildfire. And yet that's how fires often start, not with a torch, but with a single spark in dry grass, the weight of recognition with every appearance she reluctantly agreed to. The applause grew louder, but so did the expectations. People didn't just want Clara Mayfield to win. They wanted her to represent, to embody, to stand for a whole catalog of things she hadn't asked to stand for. Women in rural sports, aging competitors, working-class heroes, small-town success stories, even national pride. And while she respected the intent, the sheer size of that symbolic mantle wore on her like a coat 2 sizes too large. It wasn't the pressure of shooting that shook her. It still felt like home. It was the pressure of being more than Clara, of being a curated version of herself, stripped of her quiet edges and repackaged for headlines. People expected speeches, sound bites, slogans. Clara spoke in presence, not performance. Her wisdom came in pauses and long stares out the window, not in viral catchphrases. One afternoon, while preparing inventory receipts at the store counter, a well-dressed man in his early 30s walked in, phone already recording. He introduced himself as a producer for a television network, said they were looking to develop a mini-series about authentic American women, and would she be willing to star in a few episodes? Clara looked up slowly from her clipboard. "They're going to be actors pretending to milk cows," she asked dryly. He laughed, assuming she was joking. After he left with an awkward handshake and a business card that she used as a bookmark, Clara locked the front door and turned off the lights. She stood in the center of her store, surrounded by jars of pickles, boxes of ammunition, and hand-knit dishcloths made by her neighbor's wife. She stood there for a long time, hands braced on the counter, wondering if she was starting to disappear in the very spotlight that claimed to reveal her. The return to the range the next morning. She rose before dawn, brewed her coffee in silence, and took the old truck up to her father's clearing beyond the ridge. The one with the rusted license plates nailed to fence posts and the echo of wind in the pines. It was the only place that hadn't changed, where her name didn't come with fanfare, where the birds didn't care whether she'd hit the X-ring in under 45 seconds. She'd set up her targets without ceremony, laid down on the cold earth, and took her first shot. Ping! It was clean. She reloaded. Ping! She exhaled. Let her breath settle back into its rightful rhythm. By the 10th shot, she didn't feel like a symbol. She didn't feel like a movement. She felt like herself again, a woman with a steady hand, a borrowed rifle, and the kind of clarity that doesn't need a microphone. That night, she declined 3 speaking invitations and didn't feel guilty. The letter that changed everything 2 weeks later, Clara received another letter. It wasn't from a fan or a producer. It was from a young woman named Maribel Torres, a high school senior from a struggling town in New Mexico. Her father had recently passed a former sharpshooter and immigrant who'd taught Maribel to shoot tin cans just like Clara's dad had. She wrote about how she'd never believed she belonged in competitions, how people told her she didn't look the part, how she'd nearly quit until her uncle showed her Clara's competition footage. "You didn't smile, Maribel?" wrote. "You didn't wave or cry or try to win them over? You just stood there and did the thing?" That's when I knew. I don't have to perform to be worth something. I can just show up and do the thing, too. The letter ended with a line that would stay with Clara for the rest of her life. "You didn't give me permission to dream louder. You gave me permission to dream quietly. Thank you for that." Clara folded the letter and placed it in the wooden drawer beneath her bed, the same drawer that held her father's last note and her mother's old rosary. That night, as rain tapped gently on the roof, she realized something profound. It wasn't the spotlight that mattered. It was the echo of her presence in someone else's story. She didn't have to chase it. She didn't have to accept every stage or headline. All she had to do was keep showing up quietly, confidently, completely, and the people who needed her would still find her. The legacy, the protege, and the rifle passed on it had been 5 months since Clara Mayfield last stepped into a competition arena. The trophy still sat on the shelf above her fireplace, not because she needed the reminder, but because it was. The only space high enough to keep it from being used as a hat rack by her niece when she visited. Fame, like a flash fire, had roared through her life and then burned out, leaving behind a quiet warmth and the faint smell of smoke. The magazine interviews stopped. The invitations thinned. The attention, like all fleeting things, drifted elsewhere. To a new rising star from Colorado with a mechanical grip and corporate sponsors, to a viral teen prodigy doing trick shots blindfolded, the world moved on, hungry for the next story, and Clara, ever herself, welcomed the return to silence. She went back to the rhythms that had always sustained her, the store, the porch, the forest clearing. She kept shooting, but only on mornings when the clouds sat low and the wind teased the treetops. She stocked shelves, fixed the broken freezer herself, and resumed writing weekly notes to Maribel Torres, who was now preparing for her first collegiate level sharpshooting competition, and always signed her letters with "Still dreaming quietly." Clara smiled every time she saw that. But the story wasn't finished yet. Not quite, because one late afternoon in October, as golden light fell like honey through the cracked windows of her shop, Clara heard the bell above the door chime, a single note, crisp and unexpected. She looked up to see a young girl, maybe 13, standing with both hands behind her back and a defiant kind of nervousness in her eyes. It's the kind that people wear when they're determined not to flinch. Her clothes were plain but clean, her boots scuffed from long walks, not fashion. And her braid, loose and slightly crooked, reminded Clara of her own childhood. Before the world had tried to tuck her into labels too small for her spine. "Can I help you?"
"Hey, sweetheart."
Clara asked, setting down a box of birdseed. The girl hesitated, then stepped forward, revealing what she had hidden behind her, an old .22 rifle. Worn at the edges but clearly cared for, she placed it gently on the counter like it was a sacred thing. "My name's Lainey. My grandma said you might be the one to teach me how to shoot proper." Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at the rifle, then back at the girl, whose expression wavered between determination and the flicker of fear that every young person carries when asking to be taken seriously. "I don't run a school," Clara said, voice low and even. "I know," Lainey replied quickly. "I ain't asking for a free ride. I clean stalls. I haul feed. I'll work for every minute of your time." Clara studied her for a moment, then nodded once the same. Way she'd nodded years ago after her first bullseye at Cedar Hollow, like sealing a contract with herself. "All right then, see if you're half as steady as your voice." That was how it began. The passing on the next few months unfolded like chapters in a book neither of them expected to write. Lainey showed up every morning before school. Even in frost, even in fog, Clara didn't coddle her. She taught her the way her father had taught her, with quiet correction. Unflinching honesty, and the occasional joke so dry it turned to dust before it landed. Lainey absorbed everything, from trigger discipline to wind reading, from barrel cleaning to breath control. But what she learned most was how to exist in her own skin. No apologies required. Clara didn't just teach her how to shoot, she taught her how to be. "You don't have to be loud to be strong," Clara told her one day as they packed up after a long session. "Silence isn't weakness, it's just the sound of focus." Lainey nodded, not speaking, a student in the truest sense, storing lessons like seeds for later bloom. Word got around, of course. Other parents asked Clara if she'd consider coaching. A local club offered her a stipend to train their junior team. A regional magazine wanted to do a feature titled "From Shooter to Shepherd." Clara turned most of it down. She didn't want a program. She didn't want a brand. She just wanted to hand her skills down like an heirloom, one soul at a time, But she did say yes to one thing: a letter from the Appalachian Regional Shooting League, inviting her to return, not as a competitor, but as a guest of honor and presenter for the next invitational. They wanted her to deliver the closing words. At first she ignored the letter. She wasn't fond of speeches. But Lainey found it one day and said, with a grin that was already half her own, "You gonna let Em think you faded out, or let Em see what standing still looks like?" Clara stared at her for a long second, then laughed, the kind of deep, belly-shaking laugh that knocks dust off your bones. "I suppose I could say a few words." The final stage that spring, Clara stood once more at the Montgomery County Pavilion. Not in competition, but in legacy. The arena looked the same, but the crowd felt different. She wasn't a surprise this time. She was a story already told. But as she took the microphone under the setting sun, she didn't speak like someone who'd conquered a sport. She spoke like someone who'd made peace with herself. "I didn't come here today to talk about winning," she said, her voice steady, slow. "I came to talk about what happens after. See, when the applause fades and the lights go out, you're left with the silence, and that's where you find out who you really are. Are you chasing noise, or are you building something that lasts in the quiet?" She paused. No one moved. Even the birds seemed to listen. "I was called a simple woman that used to bother me. It doesn't anymore, because simple isn't small. Simple is clear. It's honest. It's knowing what matters and letting the rest fall away." She looked toward the crowd and locked eyes with Lainey, standing near the edge, hands behind her back, shoulders straight, holding her old .22 to like. "It was part of her heartbeat," Clara continued. "If you walk away from this range with anything, let it be this. You don't have to shout to be strong. Just show up. Just stay steady. Just do the thing." When she stepped down, the crowd didn't explode with noise. They stood, quietly, every single one. And as the last light faded over the hills, Clara handed Lainey her father's Winchester, the same rifle that had started it all. Not because she was done with it, but because she knew what kind of hands could carry it forward. Lainey took it reverently, eyes wide, the moment sitting heavy between them. "Don't try to fill my boots," Clara said with a wink. "Your own. Fit just fine." And with that, Clara Mayfield turned back to the crowd, smiled once, and walked away not into obscurity, but into the ever-widening echo of a life lived with purpose, precision, and a kind of quiet courage that never needed an audience to be real. The end.